Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Moss, and in this video, I want to talk to you about how you can break into DevOps or site reliability engineering as a fresh college graduate or even someone with no experience. The first thing that I want to say is congratulations. You've picked a very challenging career path. DevOps and site reliability engineering roles are highly technical areas of software development, and they require a lot of knowledge across a broad range of subtopics within software development. So before we get into the video, I kind of want to set expectations that this is not an easy process. It's not a short process. There's no quick career hack where you get into one of these roles in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. It's typically a years long process. The other thing that's worth acknowledging is that the job market for these roles in particular, in tech roles in general, is very difficult right now compared to several years ago. So you're competing with more people for these roles, and the level at which you're tested in interviews for these roles, I think, is much more stringent. And it's not just for big companies like Meta or Google. I see a lot of mid-size and smaller companies testing individuals rigorously, where they have to take 5 or 6 rounds of technical interviews in order to get an offer for a site reliability engineering position or a DevOps engineering role. So again, I just want to set the expectation that it's difficult to get into these roles. It's even more difficult right now with the current job market. I know that there's news out that the unemployment rate is very low, and that the labor market is really tight. But in terms of like tech jobs, it is very, very competitive and very difficult to get one of these tech roles. And I'm sure it's even more difficult as like a fresh graduate or someone with no experience to try and get into these roles. So here's my advice on how you can create a path into one of these roles. So I'm going to split this up into two high-level paths into DevOps and site reliability engineering. And you may fall somewhere in between. Everybody's experience and path is going to be unique and different from someone else's. But I think that from my experience, these are generally the two paths that I see people go into DevOps or site reliability engineering from. Okay, so path number one is the path that I would have taken if I could do it over again. I would have taken this path, and that's to, when I was in college, pursue a computer science degree or a related degree. And then while I was in my degree, try to get an internship with a company. And that internship doesn't necessarily have to be like a role that's focused on DevOps or SRE work. It could be like a developer role, front end or back end, whatever, data analytics role, some sort of internship that's in the tech industry, right? And that would be, I think, the easiest path to move into a DevOps position from. So if you're a fresh college graduate and you have a CS degree or a related technical degree, my advice is to get an internship with a company, and it doesn't have to be a tech company. It can be any company where you're going to get development experience, or maybe it specifically is like a DevOps, kind of like a junior DevOps type role, where you're performing DevOps or SRE related activities. So if you're a fresh college graduate, try and get an internship. If you're in your degree before graduating, try to get an internship, and that way you increase the chances of you getting a job offer either with the company that you interned with or with another company that you can utilize your internship experience to get into. So you're going to want to lean on, if you get an internship, you're going to want to lean on that internship experience in your resume if you are looking for a job at another company, right? Academic experience is not going to be weighted as heavily as internship and any sort of like professional experience. So you want to lean on heavily on any kind of internship experience. And here's the thing, they don't teach you in a CS degree or any like related degree the things that you need to know in a DevOps or SRE role. You learn those things on the job. For instance, in a CS degree, you'll learn about cryptography, and you might have like a paragraph in a textbook saying, yeah, cryptography is applied to things like SSL certificates. And you probably will not hear anything more of it in your degree. But the thing is, in a DevOps or SRE role, you have to know how SSL certificates work. You have to know how to create one. You have to know what a certificate authority is. And it's an extremely, important aspect of your day-to-day activities as a DevOps or SRE person. And there's a lot of things like that that they don't teach you in the degree, and you have to learn on the job. So the most important thing is to get an internship, get anything close to professional experience that will expose you to a real professional software development environment. Now, you might be in the position where you already graduated, but your degree is in an unrelated field. It's not in like CS or computer engineering or IT, and or you might not have a degree at all. And this is where I think path 2 comes in. And this is the path that I took because I majored in an unrelated degree. I majored in English with a concentration in creative writing. And so I couldn't really get like, technical internships, and that degree didn't help me get any tech jobs really. So path 2 is basically starting from zero. It's starting from the ground and building up. Personally, I think it's the most difficult way to get into like a DevOps or SRE position. I don't think that just because it's more difficult, it's like you're going to learn more taking this path. Like, I don't think so. Just because you work harder doesn't mean you're working smarter. And like I said before, if I could go back, I would take path 1 and just get a CS degree, because I think that is the easier path into a DevOps position. But if you were like me, I think one of your only options, you could go back and get a CS degree, but I mean, that timeline is pretty long. So I don't know. I would leave it up to you to choose one or the other. But in path 2, when I say starting from zero, I mean getting a IT help desk role, getting an IT support engineering role at some, small company. That's what I did. I got an IT help desk role at an architectural design firm, and I worked there for about a year. The beauty of IT help desk roles is that if you're starting at like a level 1 help desk technician, you literally do not have to know anything. There's always a need for people in help desk technician roles, and you can enter into one of those roles knowing absolutely nothing about computers, which is what I did. I knew zero about how computers worked, what their components were, or anything like that, how file systems worked. And you can get ramped up in the IT field through a help desk role. It will teach you the very basics, and the work is tough. It's not like, I wouldn't say it's fun work. It's a lot of like resetting user passwords and crawling under desks and plugging in wires from computers and re-imaging computers. It's not glamorous work, and it's tough, but it is a path. If you are like me, it is a path towards a DevOps and SRE role. And when I talk to people like coworkers and colleagues, and I ask them, I ask them about their career history. A lot of people who are in DevOps and SRE roles started out in IT support roles. Some of them started out as developers, like, they had a CS degree and they joined a development team, and then, they started handling the build and release for the product, and then they started doing test automation scripts, and then pretty soon they became that person on the team that handled like all of the DevOps type stuff, and they liked it, so they just moved into that role. And those are really kind of like the two type of people I see in DevOps and SRE roles. The person who was previously kind of like a developer, they have that formal education, and then the other person that started out in IT help desk support, and then from there moved into an SRE or DevOps role. So like I said, I would consider path two more difficult. I would not take path two again if I had a choice to go back. I would take path one. I would get a CS degree. I would get an internship. I wouldn't be picky about like, you know, the internship, what I was doing in the internship, as long as I was somehow involved in the software development lifecycle in a professional setting. Because like I said before, there's people who moved into DevOps and SRE from a formal CS background, from a developer role. So your internship could very easily lead into a DevOps or SRE role if you have this formal CS background. I don't think it's difficult to move into kind of like that, into a DevOps or SRE role from a formal CS education and from any kind of tech related internship. Now, I know the job market is extremely difficult, even for formally educated like CS folks. And if you're unable to get a job and you haven't been able to get an internship in, you know, one of these tech jobs or tech roles, then as a fallback, I would also consider getting one of the IT support engineering roles. You're more, because you're formally educated, you're more likely to get you're more likely to get an offer with one of those roles, and you don't have to stay in those roles for very long before you can move either laterally or up to related roles that get you closer to a DevOps or SRE role. So you would move from, you know, level one support engineer to maybe a network engineer, or maybe a storage engineer, or maybe you start focusing on virtualization, or you might actually get access to, like, if your company is on a cloud platform, maybe they move you to supporting a specific service in the cloud platform like EC2 or S3 or something like that. That role, the IT support engineer role, is a gateway into so many roles in tech. Okay, so let's quickly recap the two paths that I see into a DevOps or SRE role. A formal bachelor's in CS or a related degree, and then an internship, and then an actual job, either in some sort of like developer role or test automation engineer or something like that. Those are the roles that you can get if you have a formal CS education. Right from college, you can get into those roles. If you don't have a formal CS or related degree education, then you don't have as many options, and you really just have to start at zero. You can go back and get like a CS degree if you want. But in my case, what I did is I started at zero and got an IT support engineering role. And as a fallback for a CS education, if you're struggling to find a job, I would also offer IT support engineering as a fallback for formal CS education as well. Now, regardless of which path you take, these are the things that I would do in order to boost your chances of getting hired into like an entry-level cloud engineer role, or an entry-level DevOps, like junior DevOps engineering role. These are roles that, you know, on LinkedIn, they'll say like +1, you know, in the experience requirements, it says like +1 years of working with CI/CD or something like that. They're very roles that specify like +1 years of experience or something like that. They're going to be pretty flexible about their experience requirements. So look for those roles, and those would be the ones that you could consider as like entry level roles. But what I would do is I would work on a project, like a hands-on personal project that you can do in kind of a home lab environment on your personal computer. Build a simple web application. And this should be like a project. This should be a project that's end to end and involves all pieces of the software development workflow, and involves all of the principles of DevOps engineering into the project. And it can do it at a high level. Don't over engineer every step, just very high level. Don't spend a lot of time on each step, but what you want to do is create like a vertical slice and touch each area through that vertical slice of skill set that you would need in a DevOps engineering position in a personal project. So my advice would be build like a simple Python web application that has like a backend database, and through the Python, front end, the front end of the web application, maybe you can, you know, enter, it's like a note taking, for instance, right? And you enter a note, and that note gets added to the database, or you create users, right, on the front end of the web application, and users get added to the database. And then I would take that web application and I would containerize it using Docker. Okay, so that will help you get familiar with Docker, which is extremely important in DevOps and SRE roles. And then I would also automate the build and deployment of that web application. So you're going to want to use a tool like Jenkins CI, or GitLab CI, or GitHub pipelines, and automate the build of the application, automate the creation of the Docker image for the application, and then also automate the deployment to a target environment. And this would be kind of like a bonus if you want to do it, but you could deploy it to like a Kubernetes cluster. So you create like a simple deployment for your application and deploy it to several nodes in a Kubernetes cluster using a tool like Minikube or K3s or something like that. And then you could also implement very simple monitoring with like Grafana, for instance, Grafana and Prometheus, or some other similar tool. And in the case of like the Python app, if you're creating users, you could have the Python application log user creation events to a log on the machine that the application is deployed on, and then monitor those logs, for instance, in Grafana. So you could see over time how many user creation events. And what a project like this is going to do is it's creating a vertical slice through all of these skill sets. And as you're working on the project, you're going to identify areas that you really enjoyed working on. And then there'll be other areas that you're like, oh, I didn't like that. I'm not interested in that. And once you've identified the parts of the project that you really enjoyed, I want you to specialize in one tool from that project. You don't need to be an expert in all of those things. That project is meant as kind of like a high level overview of all of these pieces that you would touch in a DevOps or SRE role. Okay, so for instance, let's say that you enjoyed working with Docker. Start learning Docker more. Try to become kind of an expert in it. Build your knowledge base in Docker, and just expand your knowledge in Docker, right? And again, this is something that you should do, I think, regardless if you have a formal technical degree in like computer science, or if you're someone with no experience or an unrelated non-technical degree. The other thing that I think you should do that is kind of like a base technology for DevOps and SRE roles is learn Linux and work with a distribution of Linux. You could use something like VMware to spin up a Linux VM on your on the regular machine that you work on. That's what I do. I have a Windows machine, but then I also have like VMware with a Linux VM that I use to do projects on and write code. So you don't have to be an expert in Linux, but I would definitely learn the basics, how to navigate Linux, how to install Linux, how do you connect to a Linux machine over SSH, understand like the general directory structure of Linux. How do you do basic commands? Like how do you see memory and CPU usage in a Linux machine? How do you find files? Lots of like basic commands, but you don't need to be like an expert in Linux. In addition to Linux, you should learn Python. I already kind of indicated from the project idea that I gave that you should kind of work with Python, but in pretty much every job that I've had, like DevOps related job that I've had, the primary language that was used for all of the automation, all of the applications that the DevOps team provided to like the broader development teams, they were written in Python. You can't go wrong with Python. because it has so many different, it can be used in so many different environments in like data engineering, data science, machine learning, DevOps automation, test automation, and then in general, like even regular development work, although it's less likely that you're going to use it in like web development, but it's used in so many places. It's just kind of like the fundamental language, and it's consistently used throughout DevOps and SRE positions. So learn Python. How do you write like automation scripts? How do you write a simple hello world web application with Python, and do some simple test automation? Those are things that are going to help you shine when you're applying to DevOps, entry-level DevOps roles and entry-level SRE roles. And finally, you should be very familiar with the general workflow of software development within the context of software tooling. And by this, I mean be familiar with Git and GitHub, and what does that workflow look like, from your local machine where you wrote software. What does that workflow look like when you commit your software and push it to GitHub? And then from GitHub, it gets pushed to like Jenkins CI, and it's built in Jenkins. And then from Jenkins, it gets deployed to some sort of target environment. Be familiar at a high level, be familiar with that workflow. And I would say try to get as much experience with Git and GitHub, because that is becoming more and more important. Pretty much everything across the board, not just in software development, but in IT as well, things are being managed as code. Everything, they call it X as code, or everything as code. Infrastructure as code, like defining EC2 instances and S3 buckets in Terraform HCL language. And so it's important to not only be familiar with the software development workflow, but know how to actually participate in the software development workflow, because it's relevant across the board, from developer roles to also DevOps and SRE roles. I think if you do a hands-on project like I described before, that's kind of a vertical slice of technologies, and then you also learn the basics of Linux and Python, and just a familiarity with the overall software development workflow, specifically using like Git and GitHub. I think that's going to set you up for success and help you stand out as a candidate among others when you're applying to entry-level cloud engineering roles and entry-level DevOps engineering roles. Again, it's not lost on me that the current job market in tech is extremely competitive. It's very difficult. You have to put a lot of time and commitment. And to kind of end here on one additional piece of advice, I would say when you're applying, apply as quickly and as broadly as you can. Don't be picky about the role names. If it says like senior, or level 2, or versus like level 1, junior versus non-junior, apply to as many roles as possible, and to as many companies. So don't be picky about which company. Don't be picky about the role or the role requirements that are listed in the job description. Just kind of like blast your resume out to as many companies and applications as possible. That's what I did. I didn't keep track. I know it was like hundreds of applications that I submitted this year, and I have a good number of years of experience in that are relevant to DevOps and SRE, and it was still pretty difficult. So just apply as fast as possible and as broadly as you can. That's pretty much all I have for this video, and I hope this kind of guides you into the path that you think is best suited for your situation. I know that I defined like 2 paths, but everyone kind of falls somewhere in between along that spectrum, and everyone's situation is unique. I know my path was very, very distinct, and I'm sure yours will be as well. But generally, I kind of categorize it in those 2 paths, because at a high level, that's what I've mostly seen how people enter into a DevOps or SRE role. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider throwing a like on it and subscribing to the channel for more videos like this. And thanks for watching.